everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Business of Sports show. Today is a very special episode. We have an absolute legend of British sport with us. I can't tell you how excited I am by this episode. We have none other than Sharron Davies MBE with us today. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning to you too. What a nice intro. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today.
That's all right. You're welcome. It's not that technology is a new thing to me, but the technology we've all had to kind of embrace, during lockdown and COVID. We've been doing lots of Zoom chats with different clubs around the country trying to motivate young swimmers. And I'm like your good self, who absolutely loves technology. I hate technology. I need to be outdoors, running around, or being on my bike, or walking the dog, or doing something. So I'm muddling my way through, as they say.
We've done a very good job so far. So for all of those people who might be watching the show who might not know you, which is mind-blowing to me, tell us a little bit about yourself then. Tell us a little bit about your background and your journey before we kind of get on into some of the harder hitting questions.
Oh, I like harder hitting questions. So my journey started, I'm a swimmer. I learned to swim like so many youngsters did, just for safety reasons. And I also rode ponies and did ballet and all sorts of things. But my swimming gradually got more important as I got better. And by the time I was 11, I was a junior international. And at 13, I went to my first Olympic Games. By this stage, I'm now training 4 or 5 hours every day. And that was kind of my career, really, was 3 Olympic Games over nearly 20 years, and poolside with the BBC for coming up to 11 games in total soon, 12 with Tokyo. So this year's been a very strange year, obviously not having the games. And then different things like Big Breakfast and Gladiators and all sorts of stuff going on in the background as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, when I was kind of doing my due diligence, my background research on you, I mean, some of the things I read was just absolutely phenomenal. You said about going to your first Olympics. You went to your first Olympics at the age of 13.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just amazing.
Yeah, but the weird thing is people always think, well, that must have been very scary. But actually, it's the opposite, because when you're 13, you're taking everything in your stride. You know that this is the beginning of your journey. And though it matters, kind of every time you get in the water, you swim faster just because you're growing, so it's a sort of natural progression. So it's not daunting, as in you don't think this is my last opportunity and this is where I have to win my medal. It was much more difficult 4 years later when there was all the expectation and, hope on my shoulders. So, yeah, I mean, and then I had 8 years away, which is probably more interesting, really, in some respects, that I left the sport for 8 years and then I came back and did it at the ripe old age of 30 and did my last Olympic Games in 92. So 3 Olympic Games in 3 different decades.
Absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, you said about it being, you think that it'd be daunting going to the Olympics, the biggest sporting events on the planet at the age of 13. Now, kind of one of the things that I was thinking about was not only is it something fantastic to represent, the entire country at that age, but how was the experience from, other athletes? Because you'd be coming up against people who are much older than you, who have, come through the ranks as well. And all of a sudden there's this 13-year-old on the scene, beating some of them and actually, building a huge reputation. How did other athletes take to you in your events?
Swimming in those days was probably a younger sport than it is today. We now, with lottery funding and with fantastic programs in most of our major universities, certainly Loughborough, Bath, Stirling, Cardiff, we have great setups now where we support our elite athletes, and lottery as well makes a huge difference too. So we often used to push our athletes very young, very quick, and in some instances burn them out, which is why I did stop the first time around when I was 18, nearly 19 years of age, because I just needed a break. And in those days, you couldn't have a break. You either kind of did it or you didn't. So it was a bit of an enforced break, really. And then I got banned for being a professional because I'd received £40 for a TV program called Give Us a Clue. So I wasn't allowed to come back into the sport. Yeah, so that's how different times were to what they are now. It was, you were very professional in the way that you were training, i.e. 6 hours a day, but you weren't professional in the way that you were treated and the support that you had. So that, we're in a very, very different place with what we do with our athletes today than what we used to do then. And, you know, we've seen that. We've seen the results. We've seen the results that lottery has enabled our country to have at the starting with the Olympics in 2000, but obviously probably culminating in the Olympics really in London in 2012 when we had such an amazing time. And we were the only country ever to have gone to a post-home games and won more medals with Rio. So, yeah, it's a tall order for our guys next summer in Tokyo, I have to say. So, yeah, I mean, my big problem, particularly with my first career, was when I came up against the East Germans. So all of my silver and bronze medals are behind East Germans, every single one of them. So I would have been European champion at 14 and obviously Olympic champion rather than Olympic silver medalist if you had, you know, if we were able to take them out of the equation. And frustratingly for me, even though we know what they were doing and how they were doing it, down to, in fact, we know exactly what they were taking on what day they took. The IOC have still decided that it's not, that they don't want to open that can of worms and alter all those results. So that's very frustrating. And it was frustrating at the time because we knew it. You know, they looked and sounded like men, they performed like men, and they arrived on the scene when we'd never seen them before and smashed world records. And all these results were in the women's races, but not in the men's races. So it was incredibly obvious, but nobody was doing anything about it. And that's one of my big, I suppose, regrets, is that, you know, I had to deal with that. And many other people, I mean, I know British female swimmers that were 4th and 5th and 6th and never got on the Olympic podium and no one's ever heard of them. You know, and it's heartbreaking for them, really, because some of them could have been Olympic champions, but were 4th behind 3 East Germans.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to that in a second, because I think that's quite an important thing for us to kind of discuss. But you said about all the funding and everything now, you said about being banned for 40 quid for a TV show.
Yeah.
Do you think if you could move your career from when you started to say, if you could do it like right now, you know, the 2012 Olympics, all of that, would you take that choice?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the way that we support our athletes now is amazing. And the profile that our athletes have and the ability to earn a wonderful living whilst being able to compete. Not that you do it for that. Obviously, you do not do it for that. But it's nice that that's there as well. So someone like Jess Ennis will never really have to work again in her life if she doesn't want to, because, you know, obviously she had fantastic sponsorship and commercial deals, whereas I left swimming in debt. I actually had an overdraft.
Right.
I turned up in London with all my clothes in the back of my car, and promptly everything got stolen the next day. So there I was at 19 with just the clothes I stood up in, and that was it. So it's been a very steep learning curve, you know, so that's how different it is really financially. And then you've got the sort of the sports science support that they have now, you know, and the pathways that they have now, and the junior youth Olympics and all these sorts of things, and they didn't exist. I mean, you know, you either got to go to the big boy Olympics or you didn't get to go to any Olympics because they didn't have these events in place. So there's been a massive change to the way that we look after our athletes, even down to the point where they're getting, you know, fantastic physiotherapy and biological mechanical help. And then, of course, you know, if they're struggling mentally as well, they have dips, they have help, you know, psychologically, whereas we didn't have any of that. My dad went to the PT in the Navy and got him to sort out my training program for me, because we were one of the first people to actually do a lot of out of water training. And so he thought, right, how can we do this? He's an ex-PT, my dad was ex-Navy. So he said, right, I'll go and talk to the PTs in Plymouth, that's where I'm from. And they wrote us a program, and we used to do it in my mum's living room. And we would move all the furniture out and move all this equipment in, and, you know, and so we were doing it, but we were doing it in not with any of the help that they have now.
So not to kind of be controversial, but, you know, when you look back and you split the two kind of time periods, you go, right, at the moment everything is available to an athlete. You know, from, as you said, from sports psychology to biomechanics, everything like that. You know, everything is done for that extra 1%. And then go back on the flip side to when you were coming through, and you were training in your mum's lounge.
Yeah,
and it's almost, dare I say, it's almost Rocky-esque in terms of, you know, the whole technology.
Yeah. I mean, my dad used to get the key to the you know, the local pool, and the authorities allowed him to open the pool up early. And sometimes in the very early days, we used to try and swim up and down, and they wouldn't let us put lane reps in. So you had the general public swimming across the pool at the same time as we were going up and down. And it really was. But what's quite really interesting is that the actual training sessions that I was doing are almost identical to the same training sessions that someone like Hannah Miley is doing now for the 400 individual medley, which was my event and her event. So all of that is the same. It's just the kind of professional backup and the support that we were going without, and I have to give huge credit to my family, particularly my dad, who was so driven that he tried to get, people in. He bamboozled everybody to try and get us the water time we needed. And then I moved out to a private school where I could do my education with all the training that was required and catch up at weekends when I was away competing. So I would often miss a Friday of school to go away and race. So then they would organize teachers to catch up that work. And, so he just was a Trojan, really. We're trying to come up and think outside of the box to be able to do what was necessary for us to be able to compete against the Americans and, and the East Germans, who had so much support already from their government or from their university system or whatever. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. It just shows the power of family, really, as well, and kind of the drive. No sport is an individual sport. It does take a team to kind of, whether that's a family team or whether that's the more modern, massive teams behind individual athletes these days. That's fantastic.
Peter Coe was very much the same with Seb. That was his dad was his coach, and it does create problems because it's quite tough having a parent as a coach, because it means you can't ever escape away from it.
Yeah.
You can't go home and moan about your coach because coach is there at the breakfast table. So it's very intense, I have to say. And probably one of the reasons why I stopped at 19, because everything was so very full on. I just needed this break. And then, as I mentioned, I wasn't allowed to come back until they put trust funds in, which was after the 88 Olympic Games in Seoul. And yet track and field had trust funds in 1980. So if you were Seb Coe and Steve Ovett, you could race every weekend, and Andy Norman could organise you to have lots of appearance fees, and it was put into a trust fund which paid your mortgage and bought your car, but swimming wasn't allowed to have that. So again, there's the irony. That's just crazy.
And that's got to be frustrating from your point of view of going, the certainly from an Olympics point of view, the end result is the same. It is you're all going for a gold medal, and you're all going to represent your country and take that pride and passion, and yet others, I suppose it even comes down to things these days as well, in terms of different sports getting different funding and because there's different exposure in the media and things like that, and it's got to be frustrating from an athlete's point of view, or of being able to see over the fence and see that somebody else is not getting the handouts but getting the support that actually we should be affording to all of our athletes who are competing on the world stage.
Yeah, and we do. I mean, obviously have to have a criteria for lottery funding. It's not a bottomless pit. So they are trying to come up with how they do that. And it does become a dichotomy. So if you're judo and you have had, wonderful success in the past, but somehow it's gone a bit astray, then you lose your funding. So if you're losing your funding, how do you then build up the next level of stars if you've got no funding? It's a catch-22. But that is the only way that they can kind of do it, is to say, right, we reward success. We put in hopefully enough money at base, Sports Council, UK Sport England, to create a sort of a ladder and a platform. And then those that are doing it really well will get rewarded. It was just very frustrating for me way back in the early 80s when some sports had one rule and another sport had a totally different rule. That would never happen now. You wouldn't turn around and say, right, everyone can be professional except for taekwondo. They're not allowed to. They've got to be totally amateur, and they can't take any funding whatsoever, and they can't have any scholarships or sponsorship or anything. At least now we all have the same opportunities, and that was what was different. It was back in the old days when even with rugby they had boot money. So the rugby players were being paid, but they were being paid boot money and under the table rather than it being, all open and out in front of everybody else. So it was changing. Sport was evolving, and I was in that phase. And it would have been lovely to have gone to LA where there was no East Germans. That's the thing I'm most frustrated about. I could have finished my career, on a high. I wouldn't have even had to go any faster 4 years later to pick up more medals. I just would have had to do the same time. And that's what's really annoying for me, is that I didn't, wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, and that was kind of, again, during my research, and it kind of even annoyed me as I was reading it, of going, when somebody has admitted that they are a drug's cheap. There's no which way about it. They have taken substances to improve their performances, banned substances, and they've still got taken gold, and they're still recognised as the gold medal winner. Yeah, we've slightly touched upon it, but that has to be ridiculously frustrating from you. As you just said, you wouldn't have had to have swum any faster to have taken the number one podium position, taken gold, and that's a different kettle of fish then.
I know. Well, I held the Commonwealth records for 12 years, and obviously the Australians are very strong swimmers. So I had the Commonwealth record for 12 years, and I had the British record for 24 years in my event.
And you don't hold records for 24 years if they're not pretty decent records, especially as you said, with all the up and coming swimmers and things like that. Sometimes these days records are broken left, right, and centre. So to hold a record for 24 years, it is amazing, absolutely amazing. But would you exchange?
I am a big believer that you have to look at life as your cup is half full rather than your cup is half empty. So I think to myself, well, I had a lot of opportunities to be involved with television, to work with the BBC, to be poolside. I was probably the first female person that came out of sport, not the first female person to be involved in sports presenting, because we've had some great names that were there sort of when I was competing. But certainly the first female, as far as I remember, that was actually racing to be given a job holding a microphone. So I've had other opportunities, and I will always be really, really grateful for those. So in one hand, something didn't quite work out the way that it would have done. But on the other hand, I had these great chances to do things. And I went to university in America, and I decided not to stay there because I had to maintain my scholarship by swimming, and I needed this break. And I had this funny nagging feeling in the back of my head that if I did 4 years at university at Berkeley, which is where I was in San Francisco, I might never come home. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I am very British. I want to come back to the UK. And then I came back. So, yeah, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunities that I have had, and to be still involved in my sport all these years later, to have not missed an Olympic Games since I was 13 years old, and I'm very shortly 58, is I'm wonderful, and I love it, and I feel so privileged to be there and be the person that puts the microphone in front of their face. I remember watching Mark Spitz win his 7 gold medals. That was my eureka moment as a child, with his handlebar moustache and his big row of medals. And then when Michael Phelps won his 18th gold medal and became the most decorated Olympian in history, because it was London in 2012, BBC were in host broadcasting position, and I got to be the first person in the world to speak to him at that moment. And I just felt like my whole kind of career had done this massive circle, and how cool was that? So there's been some really lovely kind of moments in my life that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Talking about trading, so would you trade the world records for that gold?
Ooh, that's a good question, isn't it? Often Olympics aren't necessarily won in world records. What we find now, and what we will particularly find in Tokyo, because they're swimming the finals and the heats in opposite way round, which they really shouldn't, but they're doing it for American television, is that we get a lot of world records broken in semi-finals when the pressure is slightly off, and then when it's the Olympic final, it's all about where you come. And then sometimes people just very slightly tighten up, and then it's racing rather than racing the clock. So we get great world records in semi-finals, and we often get great racing in Olympic finals. Every pool is slightly different, and obviously world records get beaten slightly less all the time because we're getting to the nth degree of what humans are capable of doing. With track, for example, they probably don't break them as often as we do in the pool, because they've got to a point where their bodies are breaking down so much with the work that they're doing that a big part of their winter training is just trying to stay healthy and keeping their body in one piece, ready to be able to race the season. Whereas our problem is sometimes overtraining, doing too much yardage, knackering our shoulders and things like that. But we have sort of over the last few years realised that it's about longevity. And someone like Adam, PT, is looking, to do Tokyo and another 4 years after that. He wants a career that will stretch at least 3 Olympic Games. Yeah.
So, I mean, you said about longevity then. How as a professional athlete did you deal with injuries? Because again, I read up in the run up to your first Olympics, you broke both of your wrists. which could be an absolute devastating injury for a swimmer. But I read that you continue training, you continue doing things. How did you deal with those kind of setbacks, really, throughout your career?
So I think I was, I'm going to get this right, I think I was 11, and I was on a tree swing. And I fell out of the tree swing being a tomboy, because I've always been a tomboy, and put my arms down to save myself and broke both bones in both arms. So they look like, like Zeds. I was out there by myself. I picked my watch up between my two fingers, walked home, walked into the kitchen, said, "Dad, I think I've broken my arm." And he said, "Oh, for goodness sake, Sharon, support it with the other." I said, "Nope, I think I've broken that one as well." So I went to the hospital and had this plaster put from here to here, and I couldn't do anything. After 2 days, my fingers went blue. We went back to the hospital. They replastered one arm because they'd made it too tight. Then 2 days after that, they rang up and said, "Oh, we forgot to x-ray you. You need to come back in again to make sure we'd set it properly." They hadn't. They had to re-break it and reset it. And on the way home, my dad said, "Oh, you've missed a week's training, Sharon." And I went, "Well, I know." And he went, "Well, that's not good, is it? The rest of the world is still training." And I went, "Oh, I guess so." So we went by Tesco's, picked up a load of Tesco's plastic bags, and he sellotaped them all over my plasters. And I just carried on with 2 broken arms.
Oh, wow.
Hey, that was fine. And then the year after, I put my foot in a pothole and tore the ligaments in my knee, and my dad just tied my legs together, and I just pulled for 6 months. So those are the 2 years previous to the year that I went to the Olympics. So yeah, balanced it out. Legs 1 year, arms the next.
Yeah. I don't really know what to say with that. When you look at kind of when people get injured these days, and there's all cryotherapy and all this kind of stuff, and you had Tesco's carrier bags.
Yeah, I just had carrier bag. Did the job.
That's we have to say other supermarkets are available.
Absolutely. And other bags are perfectly good for wrapping plaster in. Yeah, no, it's about mental attitude, isn't it? I think it taught me that we're so capable of doing more than we think we are, and we're so much tougher than we think we are. And if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Basically. And I think a lot of sport is about mental strength, and it's really underrated how important that is. So you can physically have everything going for you, but if you haven't got that mental resilience and that ability to get up every time you get knocked over, and you will get knocked over, that's sport. If you haven't got the ability to get up and find a way around it, to find a solution, then ultimately you won't succeed. You'll just be an also-ran. So it's those. If you look back to anybody that you admire in sport, they will have all had dark moments, things where were real challenges, and that they had to find their way through. Yeah,
and I mean, one of my favorite quotes from films, I actually have it on my wall in my office, is one of the quotes from Rocky about saying that life isn't all sunshine and rainbows. It's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And I think that's a very, very poignant thing. Again, as an athlete, or even actually in business, you have ups and downs. You don't win a deal, you don't win a race, or you have a bad training day. For some people that can really knock them for 6 and actually really take them off their path, and they kind of focus on their journey and where they actually want to get to. So how, through your career, these days, the sports psychologists and all that kind of out there, but during your career then, certainly those early days before you took a break, how did you deal with the kind of mental side of things and that focus and that drive to kind of keep moving forward? Because there had to be days, certainly when you broke your arms and they had to re-break them, there have to be times where you have to go, is this really worth it? How did you deal with those times?
It was always worth it. There is something innate about wanting to win a race which you cannot put there. So again, it's one of those things where, are champions made or are they born? Well, it's a bit of both, because obviously you have got to have a little bit of luck to stumble on the sport that physically you're absolutely perfect for, because the world is so competitive now that you're never going to get, a 4-foot basketball player or a 7-foot gymnast. You're not. They have to have the right physiology to fit their sport, because the difference is so tiny. But then you have to have that mental toughness. And then you have to be able to have the right coaching, the right access to training, the right nutrition, hopefully not get injured. So there's so many things that go into that cake to make it perfect. And for it to just happen to be baked on the day of the Olympics, absolutely 100% right. All of that's got to come together. So yes, but I think probably one of the biggest ingredients is that mental resilience, to be able to understand that everyone's in this together. We've all got question marks, we've all got doubts, we've all got issues, we all have challenges, and mine, are just the same. And I always remember thinking how, just being incredibly nervous before a competition and looking across at the other 7 people and just thinking, well, they all feel the same. And some of them might be able to cover it up a little bit better than me, but deep down, I all know that they're just as nervous as I am. And I expect some of them are even more nervous than I am. So that's the way that I kind of used to deal with it, really, was, and also sport's very, very important. If you've trained for 10 years of your life for a race that's going to last 4 minutes, the nerves that you get before that race are extraordinary. If someone had given me the opportunity to run away pre-Moscow, I would have done it. But when the gun goes and you start, you go into automatic mode, having trained for 10 years for 6 hours a day, it's just ingrained. And ultimately, it's still not life and death. Even if you don't win that race, even if something goes wrong, that's why it's important to still have family that love you, and careers and hobbies and things that you're passionate about outside of just sport. It's really healthy to not have all of your eggs in one basket. And I always give that advice to anyone that's involved in sport nowadays. Yes, you have to give 100% if you want to be great, but it's really healthy to have other things that you care about.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's important. I mean, a couple of the previous interviews that I've done for this show, I've spoken to former like professional rugby players and people like that, where it's quite easy to be in that bubble, but actually that bubble only lasts for so long. Once you're outside of that bubble, it's a different kettle of fish, So talk us through then that transition from going from being in the pool to then being poolside and your presenting role, because again, that's got to be a hard transition, because again, swimming and being an athlete, you do a few interviews here and there, but actually being on the other side of that and being the one asking the questions is it seems like it would be quite a big transition, because not everybody has that kind of personality or those traits to kind of just openly have a conversation with someone. So talk us through that kind of transition then from being in the pool to being poolside and presenting.
I think we're a little bit more forgiving, or we were a little bit more forgiving in those days than we are now. Having said that, in some respects it was tougher because we only had 4 channels. So when I was doing Gladiators, for example, Saturday night TV, 17 to 90 million people every Saturday night watched Gladiators. It was just huge. Don't think there's hardly any programs nowadays that get that many people, apart from one-off events. And that was every Saturday night. And I think it was, it was the same when I got asked to do different TV shows. Those were quite high-profile shows. I got asked to do what was the ITV version of Blue Peter, basically, and go and interview all these young people doing great things. And actually, it's lovely because I got asked to do all sorts of adventurous stuff, which was fun and I loved. And it was a very steep learning curve, but I didn't have to deal with social media. I didn't have to deal with the sort of the scathing environment that we sometimes have nowadays. The negativity that's around everybody today is a lot worse than it was back then. So you could make mistakes and people were a little bit more forgiving, to be honest with you. And I did learn on a very steep learning curve. But I was always interested. I think the secret with interviewing, and you will know this because you do, with what you're doing right now, the secret with interviewing is to listen. And what happens a lot of the time when people prepare interviews is sometimes they've got in their head 10 questions. And so they just determine they're going to get their 10 questions. But someone might have already answered question number 5 and question number 6 because they weren't listening. They were just thinking really hard about, I'm asking my 10 questions. So if you listen when you do an interview and then just ask what you think other people would be interested to hear about based on what you've just heard, and forget that there's an audience, that's half the battle, really, with an interview, I think. And I was always interested in what they had to say, because for me, I was asking people about what I love, which was swimming, predominantly.
Yeah, and that is true. I mean, you know, yeah, I sent you 10 questions, but I think in the first couple of minutes we covered a lot of them. So it is, yeah, I think there is an art to it. But let's talk about the real, and let's get serious now for a second. Let's talk gladiators.
Oh, glad to
Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was that show that everyone had to watch either before they went out for dinner or the pub or whatever, or before the kids went to bed. So, you know, had this massive following because everybody loved it. It didn't really matter how old or how young you were. It appealed to everybody. But it was darn dangerous. You wouldn't get past health and safety these days.
Yeah, and you know what? You look at a few clips on YouTube or something like that, and you kind of go, "Ooh, yeah, is that really safe?" And I know you have said, you know, a few comments in the past about the safety and things of that. Yeah, it was a hell of a program to watch. But actually, from a competing point of view, yeah, I mean, some of those things. I mean, when they asked you to do it, did you say yes straight away, or did it take a bit of persuading?
No, the opposite actually. So I said no for 3 years before I said yes.
Really?
So, yeah, I was working on the children's series called Train to Win with Daley Thompson, who's a really good friend of mine, and my husband at the time, Derek Redmond, was working on the show as a trainer. And they just kept asking and they kept asking, and I kept saying no because I was quite happy being Sharon Davis the swimmer. And as much as I love this program, I knew that it was an entertainment program. So it was much more about flicking your hair and wearing a very tiny swimsuit that rode up your backside, more than it was actually about, you know, competing properly on a particular challenge. And so I just kind of tried to stay away from it. And then because Derek was working on it so much, it just made sense to be part of it, really. I was just petrified of becoming Amazon rather than Sharon Davis, because I'd worked so hard to be Sharon Davis, and, you know, and it had sort of real integrity to what I'd done. Decades of training in a swimming pool, that I didn't want that to be replaced with flicking hairs and small swimsuits. And yeah, it was quite difficult. I mean, I remember doing 2 or 3 games on the shows where they hadn't even given us any opportunity to do any training. So the first time I did it was live on a TV show, which went against every grain in my body of preparation to try to be the best I could be, you know. And so it was about entertainment, although it was obviously sporty and full of action. It was entertainment, not rigged, but meant to be entertaining.
Yeah, actually, I find that a little bit surprising, because you would have thought that, you know, the whole point of it is that the gladiators are going to get them, and to kind of find out that you didn't actually have that much prep time, or even no prep time on the events. You would have thought that as a gladiator, you would have known the events inside and out, and you know, worked it all out, but to literally have to rock up like one of the contestants.
Yeah, you did get to it, obviously, but because I wasn't there at the very beginning, you know, I think I came in on series 4 or something like that. I was obviously learning some of them that other people had already kind of got used to. But weirdly, it wasn't those that were the issue. I think it was a game called Tilt, where you were, if you remember that, when you were sort of like this, and the gladiator always has a disadvantage of being tilted down, and the contender had the advantage of being tilted back, and they were down. So we were up in the sky. And just trying to get it back was the most important thing of all, because, you know, as you'd imagine, if you pull someone and you're aiming downwards, just gravity says you're going to fall off. So, you know, and we were probably on the whole bigger and stronger than most of the contestants. And there was an advantage to having more time to practice your route on the, you know, on the wall, for example. And it is much easier to chase someone than to be chased, because when you're being chased, you go into panic mode. Whereas when you're chasing someone, you can see them, and you know, and you can lunge and just grab. So you had to be quite brave, and you had to have good upper body strength. So on the whole, I would say we always probably had a slight advantage. But there were some games that were being introduced each season to be new, and of course they were new to us as well, you know, so we would be learning them at the same time. And it was always more important that they practiced the lights and the cameras than it was making sure that they gave us enough practice time on the games. And that was, that's just television, you know, that's what, and sometimes people didn't always see that, you know, they would look at Wolf and think he was the most amazing athlete in the world. And yes, he was great, but it was a show. And actually off camera, Mike was just lovely. Very unassuming.
And actually that's quite a big bit then, because as you said, you know, you'd spent all these years building up Sharon Davis, and getting to be a household name and everything like that. So to kind of almost kind of put that on pause and start creating this other persona, that could have been quite
I was worried. I was
quite
worried
dangerous.
about relinquishing, Sharon Davis a little bit. And I was right, because I remember going to the supermarket and I could hear this mum going, "Oh yeah, I'm sure she'll sign your autograph. Go and ask her. I'm sure she'll sign your autograph." And this young boy walked up to me next to the chicken department, and I signed my autograph, and he went back, and I heard him go, "Who's Sharon Davis?" Because it was like, it was just Amazon. That's who I'm not his fault, because he was young. He hadn't seen me swim. But that's what I'm the most proud of, is being Sharon Davis the swimmer, because that's what took years and years and years and years and years of preparation. Whereas Amazon and Gladiators was great fun, but it was entertainment.
Yeah. No, I get that. So I suppose the next kind of big question is, what are you currently up to, and what's next for Sharon Davis, not Amazon? Sharon Davis.
Oh God, like everybody, we're all struggling at the moment to know what to do with ourselves. I'm used to being very busy, and right now, obviously I'm not. Most of my work is in hospitality, so I do a lot of corporate events. I do quite a lot of award ceremonies. I do quite a lot of conferences and things like that, and all of that has just gone. So, I'm in the same boat really as most people in the hospitality industry. There's a little bit of television work, but even that kind of went dead for a very long time, and they're just beginning to find ways around things. So funnily enough, I recorded Tipping Point yesterday, and it's the first show that I've done in absolutely ages. And it was very different to the way we would normally do it, because we were all stuck in caravans away from each other. We had to have a COVID test at the weekend. Then on set, we couldn't touch each other or hug each other, or, it was very, very weird, but obviously we have to abide by the rules. And I was very grateful that we could even do it. But so life is not normal for us any more than it is for anybody else, really. Yeah. The thing that keeps me sane is I love my bike. So I'm out on the bike quite a lot. I've got 3 kids. My youngest is still only 13. The dogs, just like yourself. And I live in the countryside outside of Bath. So I think of myself as very, very lucky in the fact that I have greenery around me in a garden. My heart breaks for people that are losing their jobs at the moment, and for people in inner cities when they have lockdowns that have nowhere to go. And it is incredibly, incredibly tough. I did become a grandma on day 1 of lockdown.
Congratulations.
Yeah, but she was born with meningitis, and so that was really tough. And she spent the first 2 weeks of her life in the ICU, but she seems to be perfectly fine now. We've just got there wasn't any long-term side effects. And I just got the same challenges that everyone's got, really. And if I'm honest, it's fitness and health that keeps me sane, because being able to go in a gym and work out or get outside on my bike is just my freedom, really.
Yeah. Now, you said about being on Tipping Point. One thing I forgot to put into this is I was going to start throwing some random quiz questions at you in preparation, because as we were planning at school, you said you were on standby for Tipping Point, so I thought I'd try and help you out with some random quiz questions.
I got called in yesterday, which I've been on standby a few times. It's a show that gets recorded locally here in Bristol. Yeah. And so I'm the perfect person to have on standby, because obviously I'm close to home. So I've done it a few times for them. But actually I got called in yesterday because of COVID, and because people were sort of, have potentially been caught with a positive test. So it was.
How did you do?
I can't tell you. I told you I'd have to kill you. That's the problem. No, no, they are big secrets. Yeah, they are big secrets. The one thing I would say is that the celebrity shows that they have been recording, the ITV are giving away a great deal of money to charity at the moment, which is wonderful, because obviously so many charities have really struggled. We haven't been able to do our normal things for charities, including the London Marathon and everything. And so many of them are at breaking point. So yeah, well done ITV on that front.
Definitely. Well, what we'll do as well is in the description and everything of this video, since you just mentioned meningitis, a family member of mine has had that as well. So we'll put a link to a meningitis charity in the video as well. So you can a
strep B, if you don't mind as well, pop that one on there, because it was strep B that got transferred from mum, who didn't know she had it, which we're one of the few countries in Europe that doesn't test for it. And so she didn't know she had it. She had preeclampsia and a difficult labour. Strep B got passed to little Aria, and then Aria developed meningitis. So I think if we can make more people aware that strep B is something which people carry sometimes totally unbeknown to them,
Yeah.
And then if they do have potentially sometimes difficult births, this can get transferred and it can be incredibly serious. So yeah, it's just awareness is always good, isn't it?
Definitely. So we'll put a couple of links in the description for the video. Any donations more than welcome and much appreciated. So the final thing I've got to ask you then, not about gladiators.
Okay.
So we've talked about a lot in terms of mindset and preparation and everything like that. And what I always ask my guests is for the 3 tips that can kind of transition from sport to business about, what would be the advice that you would give to people, kind of either building a business or building a career in sport or anything really. What's the 3 things that you would say?
I think resilience is probably number 1. Because I think in life we do get knocked down. I think sadly we're not always building resilient children at the moment, and life is really tough, and we all get really tough, horrible days. I was going to swear then, but I didn't. I helped myself, and it doesn't mean that you're a failure because you have a really bad day. It just means you're human.
Yeah.
So I think we need to try to get people to understand that life has massive ups and downs. And that's just part of life, and so rather than be a victim, try to understand that, dust yourself off and start again and realize that you're really having the same experience as everybody else. And I think the other one is preparation. If you're going to be a great athlete, you have to put the preparation in. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to surround yourself with the right people, make sure that you're eating the right food, you're sleeping, you're getting the right coaching, and you're doing the work. Nothing comes for free. And sport, I suppose, is still an absolute bastion of hard work gets results. We live in a world of 5-minute fame, sadly.
Yeah.
And sometimes young people think that they're all entitled to 5-minute fame. And really, we're not entitled to anything. We have to work for everything. That's what we should be trying to teach kids, is that you work for your results. And it's an odd world that we're in at the present, made even more odd with COVID. So that resilience, that attitude to hard work will always pay dividends. There's always a tiny bit of luck. Being in the right place at the right time is a benefit. But I remember being on a cruise ship with a load of other athletes who were doing some work together, and we worked out that luck is where hard work meets opportunity. That's the definition of luck. So whenever I'm doing my motivational talks, I always say to people, I wish you opportunity rather than I wish you luck, because I think then it's down to you to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting interesting way to kind of look at it, because of the fact that you've got to put yourself in those right places at the right time to take advantage of those opportunities that some people will see as, oh, well, you just got lucky. No, actually, I worked bloody hard to get myself at that crossroads where I could turn left or turn right, but I was prepped and I was ready to make that decision, which others would deem as luck.
And be brave. Just be brave. What do you have to lose? We learn from our mistakes, but if you're too frightened to make mistakes, then you don't learn.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So it's really, really important that people go, okay, well, I'm going to go try. I'm going to give 100%. And if it doesn't work out, I will have learned from this experience. And then you take that and you do better next time. And then you take that and you do better again. And that's the only way that you can really kind of build up your life experiences and your resilience, is by constantly just putting yourself out there and trying, And there's been loads of things that I've done and I've not done it as well as I would like to. But I'd like to think, well, at least I've learned from it. And I've either learned, don't do that ever again. Or I've learned, go and get some help and learn how to do it better.
That's absolutely brilliant. And those are definitely lessons that go hand in hand with either sports or business as well. So resilience, opportunities and bravery as well. Absolutely fantastic. Sharon, it's been just as I imagined it would be. It's been fantastic having you on the show. No doubt we could probably get together again for another chat, because there's so many different things to talk about. But I really appreciate your time today, and you joining us on the show.
Absolutely. And everybody out there watching, and yourself included, take care at the moment, do all the things that we're supposed to do, and just cherish the people around you, because no one knows what's going to happen next week, do we, at the moment?
What a perfect thing to end the episode on. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.